The morning sun cut through the blinds of an upscale suburban neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed with military precision, the hedges pruned like bonsai, and the sidewalks seemed to glisten with a kind of curated perfection that only homeowners associations could enforce. It was a community built on image, the kind of place where even the paint color of a front door had to be approved by a board and where an outsider could be spotted from a mile away. Inside, one of the houses at the edge of the cul-de-sac, a man brewed coffee. Seemingly ordinary, dressed in sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, his movements unhurried, his demeanor calm. To the neighbors, he was simply Derek Johnson, the quiet black man who had moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago with little fanfare, paid for his house in cash, and rarely interacted with the families that jogged or barbecued outside. Some whispered he was probably an athlete or a retired soldier. Others speculated he might be some kind of tech entrepreneur who didn't need to work. But no one truly knew him, and Derek never corrected their assumptions. He was polite when necessary, gave a nod when passing by, but kept his life contained within the four walls of his house. That anonymity was his cover, and in truth, Derek wasn't just an ordinary man trying to avoid HOA politics. He was one of the FBI's most feared agents, the kind of operative who had brought down cartels, dismantled international cyber rings, and interrogated men so dangerous that other agents refused to be in the same room. His very identity was classified, his case history sealed behind clearance levels so high that even many in government had no idea who he really was. Yet today, all that secrecy was about to be tested not by terrorists or cartel hitmen, but by a group of imposters who thought they were clever enough to deceive him. At 9:13 a.m., the doorbell rang, 3 sharp presses, insistent and unfriendly. Derek paused, mug halfway to his lips. He rarely had visitors, and those who knew him understood better than to just show up unannounced. He set the mug down on the counter, his senses immediately sharpening. Through years of training, his instincts had become like finely tuned instruments, and something about the knock didn't feel right. Approaching the front door quietly, he peered through the side window and saw them. 3 men in dark tactical uniforms with HOA enforcement emblazoned in bold white letters across their chests. They wore black boots, utility belts with handcuffs, tasers, and what looked suspiciously like sidearms holstered at their waists. Their posture screamed authority, but not the kind that came from genuine law enforcement. It was exaggerated, almost performative, as if they were trying too hard to appear official. Derek's eyes narrowed. He had lived in many neighborhoods during his undercover stints, and while he knew HOAs loved power, he had never seen one with an armed tactical wing. Something was off. "Mr. Johnson," the man in front barked, his voice carrying the faux command of someone who had watched too many cop shows. He was tall, pale, with a neatly shaved head and a vein pulsing in his temple. "We're here on official HOA business. Step outside." Derek didn't move. Instead, he leaned against the wall, just out of sight, listening. A second man spoke up, his tone mocking. "You've been cited for multiple violations, unauthorized modifications to the property, non-compliant trash placement, and suspicious activity. We need to take you in for questioning." Derek almost chuckled. The words, "take you in," were a dead giveaway. HOAs could fine, threaten liens, even call city inspectors, but they had no authority to detain anyone. These weren't real HOA representatives. They were imposters, and they had chosen the wrong house. He took a slow breath, analyzing the situation the way he would before breaching a cartel compound. Their uniforms were cheaply made, the stitching on the patches was loose, and the lettering slightly crooked. Their belts were mismatched, equipment clearly pieced together from surplus stores. The guns, if real, were carried improperly, their grips too casual for professionals. But it wasn't the lack of authenticity that bothered Derek. It was the fact that 3 armed men had shown up at his door under the guise of an HOA. That meant one of 2 things. Either they had no idea who he really was and were targeting him randomly, or worse, they knew exactly who he was and had come for him with a purpose. The man with the shaved head pounded on the door now, harder, his voice rising with frustration. "Last warning. Come out or we come in." Derek moved silently to the table by the entryway, where an innocuous-looking bowl of keys sat. Beneath, it was a false compartment containing a small device no bigger than a garage remote. He pressed the button. Instantly, a silent alarm was triggered, a private alert system that went directly to a secure FBI channel bypassing local police. Backup would be dispatched, though Derek knew from experience it could take 20 minutes or more for specialized units to arrive. He wasn't about to wait that long. Slipping into the comm detachment he had mastered over years of field work, Derek opened the door, just a crack, enough for his face to be visible. "You boys are far from convincing," he said in a voice that carried both amusement and warning. "HOA police, huh? You think you can come onto my property and intimidate me with toy uniforms?" The shaved-head man stiffened, anger flashing in his eyes. "Step outside. Now." Derek studied him carefully. The leader wasn't used to being challenged. His companions shifted uneasily, as if realizing their act wasn't working. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the block. Then Derek smiled faintly, though his eyes remained cold. "I'll give you one chance," he said softly. "Walk away before you regret knocking on this door." The impostors exchanged quick glances, clearly not expecting resistance. The shaved-head man sneered, reaching for his weapon as though to make an example out of Derek. But before his fingers could curl around the grip, Derek's hand shot out like lightning. In one smooth motion, he yanked the man forward, slammed him against the doorframe, and twisted his arm until the weapon clattered to the ground. The others froze, stunned at the speed of his response. Derek leaned in close to the leader's ear, his voice a low growl. "You picked the wrong house," he whispered. In that instant, the impostors realized this wasn't just some quiet neighbor they could bully. Something about the precision of his movements, the absolute control he exuded, told them they were up against a man far more dangerous than they had imagined. And as Derek shoved the leader back toward his crew, he knew the game had just begun. Whoever sent these fake HOA, police wasn't after a fine or a citation, they were after him. And that meant his carefully constructed cover life in this neighborhood was about to unravel. The moment the fake officer stumbled backward into his crew, Derek stepped outside, the quiet suburban air suddenly charged with tension. The neighbors had no idea what was unfolding on this manicured street where kids rode bikes and retirees watered begonias. No one expected violence. And Derek intended to keep it that way. He didn't want screams, police sirens, or gossip that would unravel his carefully constructed alias. The imposters were rattled but not retreating. The leader scrambled upright, red-faced with humiliation, while the other two hovered behind him, hands twitching near their weapons, unsure whether to escalate or retreat. Derek's calmness unnerved them more than any show of aggression could. He stood tall, not posturing, but exuding the unshakable confidence of someone who had seen combat in shadows they couldn't imagine. "You've got 30 seconds to explain," he said evenly, his eyes locked on the leaders. "Who sent you, and why pretend to be HOA enforcement? Talk, or I'll make sure you don't get another chance." The leader tried to recover his bravado, spitting onto Derek's driveway as if to reassert dominance. "You think you're tough? You're just another homeowner breaking rules. We don't answer to you." His voice cracked slightly, betraying nerves. The others shifted uncomfortably, realizing the script wasn't going as planned. Derek noticed their shoes, cheap tactical knockoffs with soles that squeaked on the pavement. Real operators knew better than to wear gear that exposed them. These men were amateurs, but amateurs with weapons could still be deadly. He filed away every detail, the nervous tics, the lack of discipline, the fake authority, like puzzle pieces to be assembled later. Before Derek could press further, one of the imposters made a mistake. Perhaps panicked, perhaps overconfident, the shortest of the trio lunged forward, fumbling for a taser clipped awkwardly to his belt. Derek's body moved before his mind had to command it. A sidestep, a wrist lock, a sharp twist. The taser clattered harmlessly to the concrete while the man collapsed with a strangled cry, his arm bent at an angle it wasn't meant to bend. The other two froze again, their expressions darkening. What was supposed to be an intimidation routine had become a disaster, and Derek had barely exerted himself. Last warning, Derek said, his tone harder now. Talk. This time, the shaved head leader's eyes darted left and right, calculating escape. He muttered something under his breath, and the second man pulled a smoke canister from his vest. They dropped it instantly, a plume of gray fog hissing into the air, clouding the driveway. Derek cursed under his breath as the figures scrambled into the mist, retreating fast toward a black SUV idling half a block away. He considered chasing them, his reflexes screamed to pursue. But the neighborhood wasn't a battlefield. Kids were outside, cameras were everywhere, and exposing his skills too blatantly would invite questions he couldn't afford. Instead, he let them go, watching as the SUV screeched away, tires squealing against pristine asphalt. The smoke cleared, leaving only the faint smell of chemicals and a broken taser lying at his feet. Inside his house, Derek locked the door and immediately activated his internal security system. Cameras he had installed discreetly around the property fed to his laptop, giving him a rewind of the incident from multiple angles. He zoomed in on the SUV's plates, but they were covered by a temporary dealer tag, likely stolen or fabricated. The men's faces, however, were clear enough. Amateurs they may have been, but their arrogance meant they hadn't masked themselves. That was a mistake. Derek uploaded the footage to a secured FBI channel with a coded message. Possible hostile surveillance attempt. 3 male subjects, paramilitary cosplay. Intent unknown. Then he sat back in his chair, sipping the coffee he'd left to cool earlier. The taste was bitter now, but it grounded him. He replayed the confrontation in his mind. These men weren't assassins. If they had been, they wouldn't have announced themselves or fumbled so badly. No, they were probing, testing, sent by someone who either didn't know exactly who Derek was or was arrogant enough to think theatrics could unsettle him. That narrowed the suspects considerably. Organized crime groups loved theatrics, especially those that had recently lost to the Bureau. Derek's last operation had dismantled a sprawling Eastern European syndicate that laundered millions through shell companies in American suburbs. Their leaders had vowed revenge, even as they were dragged into custody. Could they have tracked him here? It was possible. Yet something didn't fit. Why the HOA disguise? It was ridiculous, almost comical, and far too local in flavor for an international syndicate. More likely, it was domestic, maybe a militia group, maybe a rogue outfit with delusions of power. Whoever they were, they had resources, vehicles, equipment, coordination. And if they had enough intel to know Derek's address, they weren't amateurs at the organizational level. The alarm system on his phone buzzed, an encrypted ping. FBI headquarters had received his footage and responded, "Sit tight. Unit dispatched. ETA, 14 minutes. Confirm status." Derek typed back, "All clear. Subjects fled. Awaiting analysis." But he didn't feel all clear. 14 minutes was a lifetime in his world. If the imposters had been a distraction, the real threat could be closing in already. He scanned the neighborhood from his upstairs window. The cul-de-sac looked normal. Sprinklers rotated lazily. A delivery truck rolled down the street. A dog barked from behind a fence. But Derek knew better than to trust appearances. He opened a hidden compartment behind a closet panel, retrieving a locked case. Inside were tools of his real trade: a compact Glock, a set of encrypted comms, and a burner laptop. His cover identity as Derek Johnson included no registered firearms, another reason the HOA charade had been so bold. If anyone investigated, they'd expect him to be unarmed, vulnerable. But the FBI had never left him unprotected. He holstered the Glock and kept it hidden beneath his shirt, just in case. Minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, 2 unmarked sedans rolled quietly into the neighborhood, blending in as much as government vehicles could in suburbia. Derek recognized the faces of the agents who stepped out, not field operators, but internal affairs liaisons. That was unusual. Instead of storming his house, they approached casually, like visiting friends. One of them, a wiry man with glasses, rang the bell. Derek let them in, but wasted no time with pleasantries. "You didn't send tactical?" he asked sharply. The man with glasses shook his head. "Orders from higher up. Low profile. Washington doesn't want this neighborhood spooked." Derek narrowed his eyes. Washington should be more concerned about who just tried to stage an arrest at my door. The second agent, a woman with a calm but firm expression, set a folder on his counter. "That's why we're here. We already identified one of them from your footage, ex-military dishonorable discharge, recently tied to a militia group operating out of the Midwest. They've been experimenting with fake enforcement tactics to intimidate communities. But this," she gestured toward him, "this was targeted. They didn't pick you by accident." Derek's jaw tightened. "So it's domestic. Fringe militia. But they knew enough to find me. That means there's a leak." The agents exchanged a look, but said nothing. Derek read the silence perfectly. There was a leak, and headquarters wasn't ready to admit it. That realization hardened his resolve. Whoever had come after him wasn't finished. This was just the first act. As the agents departed, leaving reassurances he didn't believe, Derek stood at his window again, scanning the quiet cul-de-sac. The cover life he had built here, a life of quiet mornings and ordinary anonymity, was already unraveling. He could either wait for the next move or seize control of the board. And Derek Johnson had never been the type to wait. The night came heavy and quiet, wrapping the suburban streets in a blanket of stillness that most residents mistook for safety. But Derek knew better. Darkness was never silent. It simply concealed movement. While neighbors slept behind locked doors, Derek was awake, seated at his desk, lit only by the glow of his burner laptop. The events of the morning replayed in his mind, but now he had leads, faces, a name, a militia connection. He had run the footage through his private database, cross-referencing every scar, tattoo, and gait pattern with known profiles. The shaved head leader came back as Marcus Hale, 39, ex-Army Ranger, dishonorably discharged after a weapons smuggling scandal overseas. He had since rebranded himself as the face of a militia group calling itself the Sentinels of Liberty, an organization that outwardly preached about community sovereignty and freedom from government overreach, but in reality ran extortion schemes, stockpiled illegal weapons, and flirted with domestic terrorism. Derek had seen this pattern before, fringe groups that started with angry rhetoric and spiraled into violence, once someone ambitious enough gave them direction. Marcus Hale was ambitious, but not smart. The HOA disguise was evidence enough. The smarter question was who was backing him. Groups like the Sentinels didn't have the logistics or resources to coordinate interstate operations without external funding, and that raised alarms. If someone with deeper pockets was bankrolling Hale's militia, then Derek's exposure wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. He closed the laptop, strapped on his concealed Glock, and stepped out into the night. Waiting was never his style. He had pulled the dealership number from the fake tag on the SUV, traced it to a lot on the city's industrial fringe, and confirmed through satellite images that Hale's militia had been using it as a staging ground. If the FBI wanted to play cautious politics, that was their problem. Derek was going to end this before it spiraled into something bigger. Driving an unremarkable sedan, one of several cars registered under his cover identity, he cut through empty streets until the city lights faded behind him. The industrial district was a graveyard of warehouses, most abandoned, some converted into small businesses that shuttered at dusk. His instincts guided him to a rusted building with boarded windows and a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. From a distance, it looked deserted, but Derek spotted the small movements that betrayed life. A guard smoking near the fence, a flicker of light inside, the faint hum of a generator. Parking 2 blocks away, Derek approached on foot, blending into shadows with the ease of muscle memory. He carried no night vision gear, no gadgets, just discipline and experience. Reaching the perimeter, he timed the guard's pacing, slipping through a gap in the fence when the man turned his back. Inside the lot, a cluster of vehicles sat haphazardly parked, some with stolen plates, others military surplus. Derek crouched low, circling until he reached a dirty window. Peering inside, he saw them. A dozen men in mismatched uniforms, gathered around a table littered with maps, rifles, and laptops. At the head of the table, Marcus Hale barked orders, slamming a fist for emphasis. Derek couldn't hear every word, but he caught enough: targets, infiltration, timetable, and then his own picture projected on the wall. It wasn't a random hit. They knew exactly who he was. Derek's pulse slowed, not quickened. Confirmation was clarity. This wasn't about HOA disputes or intimidation, it was personal. They wanted him neutralized, perhaps as revenge for his past operations, perhaps as a message to the Bureau. But how had they found his cover identity? That was the real question. Watching carefully, Derek noticed another figure in the room, someone who didn't fit. Unlike the rough ex-military man, this one wore a pressed suit, his posture refined, his hands clean of labor. He whispered to Hale, pointed at the maps, and received deferential nods. Derek couldn't see his face clearly, but the contrast was glaring. Whoever he wasn't a militia grunt. He was money, and money was what made militias dangerous. Pulling back from the window, Derek calculated his options. He could storm the place now, dismantle them one by one, but the risk was high: dozens of armed men and no backup. The smarter move was information. Confirm the financier's identity, extract proof of their connection, and then dismantle them systematically. But as he circled toward a better vantage, fate intervened. A careless grunt stepped outside to relieve himself and spotted movement. "Hey!" the man shouted, fumbling for his weapon. Instantly, chaos erupted. Derek moved like a phantom, closing the distance before the man could raise his gun, silencing him with a chokehold that dropped him limp into the gravel. But the damage was done. The alarm had been raised. Shouts erupted from the warehouse, boots pounded the floor, and doors slammed open. Derek sprinted toward the fence, weaving through shadows as bullets cracked in the night. Sparks flew as rounds struck metal, but his pace never faltered. Reaching the fence, he vaulted over, disappearing into the maze of warehouses before the militia could organize pursuit. Back in his car, heart steady, Derek reviewed the encounter in his mind. He had confirmation now. A militia staging ground, Hale's leadership a mysterious financier, and proof that his cover had been blown. They would tighten security, relocate, maybe accelerate their plans. That meant Derek had to move faster. He drove through the night, heading not home but to a safe house stocked with resources the Bureau didn't even know he still kept. Inside the nondescript apartment, he laid out weapons, burner phones, encrypted drives. He uploaded the photos he had snapped during his escape, grainy but clear enough to show Hale, the maps, and the suited stranger. He transmitted them to a single contact at the Bureau, an analyst he trusted completely, with the message: "Find me this man. Priority 1. Hours passed as he prepared for war, cleaning his Glock, checking ammo, mapping routes. Finally, his secure line buzzed. The analyst's voice came low, but urgent. "Derek, you're not going to like this. The man in the suit, his name is Richard Mallory. He's not militia. He's a lobbyist. High level. Been funneling dark money into fringe groups for years, but no one's ever pinned anything solid on him. If he's with Hale, it means someone in power wants deniability, and they're using you as bait." Derek's jaw tightened. Mallory. The name was familiar. He had heard it whispered in D.C. circles, always just beyond reach of prosecution. If Mallory was backing Hale, then this wasn't just about militia theatrics. It was a calculated operation with political shielding. And if they were using Derek as bait, then the attack on his home had been the opening move in a much larger game. He stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders. The imposters weren't just testing him. They were testing how far he could be pushed, how much noise could be created before the Bureau intervened. And the Bureau, by sending only liaisons instead of tactical teams, had already shown reluctance, which meant Derek couldn't count on them. He poured a glass of water, his reflection in the glass steady and unreadable. If Mallory wanted to play politics with militias as his pawns, fine. But Derek wasn't going to be bait. He was going to flip the board, expose the financier, dismantle the militia, and remind everyone Mallory, Hale, and whoever else lurked in the shadows Why he was the most feared agent in the Bureau. The game had escalated, but Derek had spent his life thriving where escalation was inevitable. Tonight was reconnaissance. Tomorrow would be retaliation. The next morning broke calm and ordinary for everyone except Derek Johnson. Sunlight stretched across rooftops, sprinklers clicked on, and children prepared for school. But Derek was already moving, already hunting. The militia had shown their hand, Mallory had revealed his funding role, and the Bureau had exposed its hesitance. That meant this operation belonged to him alone now. For Derek, missions were never about vengeance, never about pride. They were about control, precision, and sending a message that could not be misunderstood. He spent hours mapping out Mallory's network, tracing shell companies' political donations and property records. His analyst contact confirmed that Mallory's fingerprints were all over a private consulting firm that laundered money into Hale's militia. Derek knew better than to expect the FBI to act quickly. The Bureau was paralyzed by bureaucracy, always weighing politics against action. But Derek had never needed permission to do what was necessary. By nightfall, he had a plan. Take Hale out of play, corner Mallory with evidence too explosive to bury, and dismantle the militia before they staged whatever attack their maps had outlined. He wasn't just going to stop them. He was going to end them. He started with Hale. Through surveillance footage and license plate readers, Derek tracked the black SUV from the previous day back to a rural compound an hour outside the city, an old farmstead converted into a training ground. The Sentinels of Liberty had built their fortress there. Watchtowers manned by armed guards, floodlights cutting across fields, and bunkers stacked with stolen weapons. Derek approached under cover of darkness, slipping through tree lines and irrigation ditches until he was close enough to see their routines. He watched for hours, memorizing patrol routes, guard rotations, blind spots. He could have called in a SWAT raid, but that would have tipped Mallory off. Derek needed Hale alive, and he needed him to talk. When midnight struck and the compound was at its quietest, Derek moved. He neutralized the perimeter guards with silent takedowns, dragging their unconscious bodies into the shadows. He cut the power to the floodlights with a precise snip of wire, plunging the farm into confusion. By the time alarms started ringing, Derek was already inside, weaving through chaos like a phantom. The militia scrambled, some firing blindly into the night, others shouting contradictory orders. Derek struck with surgical precision, disarming one, incapacitating another, using their own confusion against them. Within minutes, he had reached the central farmhouse where Hale barked commands in panic. The door burst inward, and Hale spun, gun raised, but Derek was faster. A single shot knocked the weapon from Hale's hand, and a brutal kick slammed him against the wall. Hale struggled, snarling, but Derek pinned him with a forearm to the throat. "You think you're a soldier?" Derek hissed. "You're just a puppet. Who's pulling your strings? Who's funding this?" Hale tried to sneer, but Derek tightened the pressure until his face reddened. At last, the defiance broke. "Mallory," he choked. "Richard Mallory. He promised us protection. Said the feds would look the other way. He gave us money, weapons, everything. We just had to take you out, make you disappear." Derek's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This wasn't just revenge, it was a sanctioned operation shielded by political influence. Mallory had orchestrated it, betting that Derek's elimination could be swept under the rug, disguised as militia violence. But Hale had just given him everything he needed. Derek knocked him unconscious, zip-tied his wrists, and dragged him outside. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance now. The Bureau, alerted by Derek's silent alarm signals, was finally moving in. He left Hale for them, a gift-wrapped package of testimony and evidence. But Derek wasn't done. Hale was the blade. Mallory was the hand holding it, and hands had to be severed. The following day, Derek suited up, not in tactical gear, but in the armor of anonymity. A tailored suit, clean shave, the look of a man who belonged in the halls of power. He walked calmly into downtown D.C., blending with aides, lobbyists, and staffers who rushed through marble corridors. Mallory's office was on the 12th floor of a sleek glass tower, his name not on the door, but hidden behind layers of shell firms. Derek bypassed security with forged credentials, moving like a man who had every right to be there. When he entered the office, Mallory was mid-conversation, laughing into a phone, whiskey glass in hand. The moment he saw Derek, the smile froze. "Who the hell are you?" Mallory demanded, but his eyes betrayed recognition. He knew exactly who Derek was. Derek closed the door behind him, locking it. He moved with the calm menace of inevitability. "You sent amateurs to my door. You funded a militia to stage a farce. You thought I'd fold, quietly disappear. But you miscalculated." Mallory tried to recover composure, setting the glass down with a shaky hand. "You don't scare me. I have protection, connections that go higher than you can imagine. Take me out, and you'll start a war you can't win." Derek leaned forward, his voice low and lethal. "I don't need to take you out, Mallory. I just need to expose you." He tossed a flash drive onto the desk. Mallory glanced at it, frowning, before realization dawned. The drive contained everything: videos of his meeting with Hale, financial records, wire transfers, even Hale's recorded confession. Derek had pulled it all from the safe house overnight, packaging it into a weapon more devastating than bullets. By now, Derek continued, "Copies of that drive are sitting in inboxes of journalists, watchdogs, and prosecutors. Your empire of influence collapses the moment they open it. You're finished." Mallory's mask cracked, sweat beaded on his forehead, his arrogance bleeding into desperation. You'll go down too," he stammered. "You acted off the books, no authorization. They'll crucify you." Derek's expression didn't change. "I don't fear crucifixion. I fear inaction. And men like you thrive on inaction. Not anymore." He turned toward the door, pausing only once. "The Bureau won't save you. Your friends in power won't save you. By the time you realize how badly you've lost, you'll already be alone." He left without another word, walking out of the tower as calmly as he had entered. Hours later, headlines exploded across every major outlet. "Lobbyist exposed for funding domestic militia, federal investigation launched." Photos of Mallory plastered screens, his denials drowned by evidence too overwhelming to ignore. The Sentinels of Liberty crumbled overnight, their members arrested, their compound raided, their rhetoric silenced. And through it all, Derek remained invisible. No interviews, no recognition, just a quiet man brewing coffee in his suburban home the next morning as if nothing had happened. But those who mattered knew. In the Bureau's highest corridors, whispers spread again about the shadow of an agent who operated without fear, who dismantled threats others couldn't even see coming. Neighbors still thought of Derek Johnson as the quiet man at the edge of the cul-de-sac, but in truth, he had just shifted the balance of power in Washington itself. And though new enemies would surely rise and new games would be played, Derek welcomed it, because fear was his weapon and control was his domain. And as long as men like Mallory existed, Derek Johnson would remain what he had always been, the most feared agent in the FBI.